So I wanted to read The New Shadow, which was a story that Tolkien began as a sequel to Lord of the Rings, but abandoned rather abruptly shortly after even barely starting it. I don't believe in the reasons given even by Tolkien himself because it contradicts himself. I'll start by reading what it says in his letter from May 13, 1964, letter number 256. I did begin a story placed about 100 years after the downfall of Sauron, but it proved both sinister and depressing. That's important to note because we'll mention what really was depressing to him about it, in my opinion, again. Since we are dealing with men, it is inevitable that we should be concerned with the most regrettable feature of their nature, their quick satiety or satiety with good, being satiated with good. So that the people of Gondor, in times of peace, justice, and prosperity, would become discontented and restless, while the dynasts descended from Aragorn would become just kings and governors like Denethor or worse. Was he predicting the future? Did he see 50 years into the future of what we are living in right now? Because that is exactly what we have. I want to say he did. I found that even so early there was an outcrop of revolutionary plots about a center of secret Satanistic religion, interesting point, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs and going around doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing. Now, if it was just a thriller, then why did he write similar stories, little stories that had little significance um, to the main lore? For example, the story that we have in the Second Age in the Unfinished Tales of Andarion and Aceris. I forget. I'm probably saying it wrong right now. It's not really important. There's very slight significance at all to the history of the Second Age, but he wrote it. I've never read it. I plan to read it as well. I disagree that it's a thriller. I think that it was just that depressing for him to realize that the generations that would follow him would disparage and even come to detest the values that he felt were integral to the preservation and survival of Western civilization. Um, what else did he write, real quick, on letter number 338? I have written nothing beyond the first few years of the Fourth Age, except the beginning of a tale supposed to refer to the end of the reign of Eldarion, about 100 years after the death of Aragorn. Then I, of course, discovered that the king's piece would contain no tales worth recounting, and his wars would have little interest after the overthrow of Sauron, but that almost certainly a restlessness would appear about then, owing to the, it seems, inevitable boredom of men with the good. There would be secret societies, quote unquote secret societies. It makes me think of what C.S. Lewis wrote in That Hideous Strength, and even of what Stanley Kubrick tried to clearly suggest in Eyes Wide Shut, that there would be secret societies practicing dark cults and orc cults among adolescents. So let's get into the story because it's important, right? The New Shadow. This tale begins in the days of Eldarion, son of that Elessar of whom the histories have much to tell. 105 years had passed since the fall of the Dark Tower, which we know is Barad-dûr. And the story of that time was little heeded now by most of the people of Gondor, though a few were still living who could remember the War of the Ring as a shadow upon their early childhood. Right? So, I mean, it's almost as if he's talking about um, the First World War or even the Second World War, and how less than, what, 4 or 5 generations later, we have forgotten it. We have forgotten the lessons that we should have learned from that struggle. One of these was old Borlas of Pen Arduin. He was the younger son of Beregond, the first captain of the guard of Prince Faramir, who had removed with his lord from the city to Emin Arnen. Deep indeed run the roots of evil, said Borlas, and the black sap is strong in them. That tree will never be slain. Let men hew it as often as they may, it will thrust up shoots again as soon as they turn aside. Not even at the feast of felling should the axe be hung up on the wall. So he's telling you that there's a recognition, and it's actually very impregnated in the lore, that the earth itself is infested with an evil, that you will never destroy it as long as you live in this creation. It will always be shooting up saplings, as it were. And even as you succeed in one battle, you should not lose vigilance. Very important lesson. Plainly, you think you are speaking wise words, said Ceylon. So this is a discussion between Borlas, who represents the old generation. Even though Borlas was barely a child, he didn't really participate in the War of the Ring and Lord of the Rings, but he is old enough to have been born with a sense of reverence and wariness about the lessons learned in that war. As many people that were born, the boomers that were born either during or right after World War II. Ceylon represents the new generation coming up that has lived in the fat of the land, the best of times, he has benefited from all the efforts of his forebears and has no appreciation for them. Kind of like how we have with millennials and the ones that follow. Plainly, you think you are speaking wise words. I guess that by the gloom in your voice and by the nodding of your head. But what is this all about? Your life seems fair enough still for an aged man that does not now go far abroad. Where have you found a shoot of your dark tree growing? In your own garden? Yeah, indeed. Already in the tone of Ceylon, you see the sarcasm, the cynicism that this new generation has, the lack of respect, for those that came before. Borlas looked up, and as he glanced keenly at Ceylon, he wondered suddenly if this young man, usually gay and often half mocking, had more in his mind than appeared in his face. Borlas had not intended to open his heart to him, but being burdened in thought, he had spoken aloud, more to himself than his companion. Ceylon did not return his glance. He was humming softly, while he trimmed a whistle of green willow with a sharp nail knife. The two were sitting in an arbor near the steep eastern shore of Anduin, where it flowed about the feet of the hills of Arnen. It's always geography is always very important to Tolkien. Gives you also a really real sense of location, of this being a real live place. The way you would, say, whenever you tell somebody a story about where you were in your city or your town, you tell them, you give them those place points so that they know, oh yeah, you were here, okay. They were indeed in Borlas's garden, and his small gray stone house could be seen through the trees above them on the hill slope facing west. Borlas looked at the river and at the trees in their June leaves, and then far off to the towers of the city under the glow of late afternoon. No, not in my garden, he said thoughtfully. Then why are you so troubled? Asked Ceylon. If a man has a fair garden with strong walls, then he has as much as any man can govern for his own pleasure. Isn't that like the trying to say, mind your own business, as long as you do what you do and I do what I do, it doesn't matter? That whole concept of I don't care what you do, which we have adopted in the West, of everybody, as long as what you do doesn't interfere with my freedom, you can do whatever you want. But we learned now, after 2020, finally. We've learned that it doesn't work that way, does it? They don't just leave you alone for giving them their freedom, their peace of mind, let's say, their ability to engage in perversions. And at the end of the day, they come after you. He paused. As long as he keeps the strength of life in him, he added. Ah, is that a low-key threat? It seems like a low-key threat, doesn't it? When that fails, why trouble about any lesser ill? For then he must soon leave his garden at last, and others must look to the weeds. Borlas sighed, but he did not answer, and Ceylon went on. But there are, of course, some who will not be content, and to their life's end they trouble their hearts about their neighbors, and the city, and the realm, and all the wide world. You are one of them, Master Borlas, and have ever been so since I first knew you as a boy that you caught in your orchard. Even then you were not content to let ill alone, to deter me with a beating, or to strengthen your fences. No, you were grieved and wanted to improve me. You had me into your house and talked to me. So already we have that mentality that's very common nowadays where, oh, you hurt me, you beat me, you traumatized me by disciplining me, by telling me I couldn't live my truth. So already we're seeing that mentality creep in as a form of trying to impose guilt. And guilt is a very important thing used against us, especially those of us who are Christian. So now he's quoting, I remember it well. Orcs work, you said many times. Stealing good fruit, well, I suppose that is no worse than boys' work if they are hungry, or their fathers are too easy. But pulling down unripe apples to break or cast away, that is orcs' work. How did you come to do such a thing, lad? This is very important. There is a difference between stealing when you are hungry because you need to eat and you have no other remedy, maybe you haven't found another way to do it. You are misled or you are desperate. And just stealing and destroying for the sake of your own entertainment, your own way of getting out your frustration. And that's what he's talking about here. Now you've strayed from being a bad boy to being an orc, to being something that revels in the suffering of others and in the destruction of nature and of those things that make life worthwhile and have meaning. Orcs work? I was angered by that, Master Borlas, and too proud to answer, though it was in my heart to say, in child's words, if it was wrong for a boy to steal an apple to eat, then it is wrong to steal one to play with. But no more wrong. Don't speak to me of orcs' work, or I may show you some. So already as a child, right, we're showing as a child already, Ceylon, there's something wrong with him. There's something wrong with this generation that has no internal sense of pity and of humility and of self-awareness and self-criticism that those that came before we had very strongly instilled in us, because it comes with suffering. When you don't have suffering, when you're born into privilege, like the generations have come, something that used to be something reserved for nobility and royalty, it's now become common among men. It was a mistake, Master Borlas, for I had heard tales of the orcs and their doings, but I had not been interested till then. You turned my mind to them. I grew out of petty thefts. My father was not too easy, but I did not forget the orcs. I began to feel hatred and think of the sweetness of revenge. We played at orcs, I and my friends, and sometimes I thought, shall I gather my band and go and cut down his trees? Then he will think that the orcs have really returned. But that was a long time ago.